Ethan stepped off the shuttle onto the smooth, glimmering surface of Aerolith, a planet that stretched into strange horizons of violet and silver. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded him of a laboratory more than a natural world. He adjusted the straps of his uniform and glanced up at the massive palace rising before him, its spires curling like delicate glass tendrils toward the sky. Every human on the team had been warned to remain silent in front of the alien royals, and he had spent hours memorizing the strict codes of behavior. A single word, a poorly timed gesture, could be taken as insult, and he knew the political stakes were high. He had come here as a diplomat, but already he felt more like a guest walking a tightrope. His human colleagues lingered at the edge of the courtyard, stiff and anxious, whispering in ways that could barely be heard. They did not know him well, yet they trusted him with the delicate task of keeping peace, of showing the aliens that humans were not just strong, but also wise, patient, and trustworthy. The palace doors opened, and attendants in flowing robes, colors shifting subtly like liquid metal, guided them inside. The interior was unlike any architecture Ethan had ever seen. The walls seemed alive, pulsing faintly with light, and intricate carvings depicted scenes of alien history, battles, and celebrations. The air was filled with a quiet hum, as if the building itself was breathing. As Ethan walked, he noticed the alien queen for the first time. Queen Asira was tall, even by human standards, and moved with an elegance that seemed effortless. Her skin shimmered like polished bronze under the soft light, and her eyes were deep pools of violet that seemed to see everything at once. She carried herself with authority, yet there was a subtle softness around her gaze that hinted at a mind weighed with care and responsibility. At her side was her daughter, Lyra, small and fragile-looking, her skin a pale silver and eyes closed as if she were listening to a world humans could not hear. Ethan had been briefed about the girl. She was deaf, a rare condition in the alien species, and as a result, she was often isolated in the palace. The queen treated her daughter with great care, but the court had little patience for someone who could not fully engage in their complex rituals and communications. Ethan's first days in the palace were tense. He observed everything, every movement, every glance. He could not speak, and the queen's attendants reminded him several times of the importance of silence. They whispered that humans' voices were unsettling to the royals, though Ethan suspected it was more about control than fear. He followed the strict rules, smiling politely, bowing, and showing respect. But there was Lyra. He saw her in moments when no one else was watching, tracing the walls, touching the carved symbols with delicate fingers. She moved as if she were discovering a secret world no one else could see. One evening, Ethan sat quietly near a window, pretending to study the courtyard when Lyra approached him. She did not speak, she could not, but her eyes were curious, searching. Ethan remembered his childhood, growing up with a sister who had learned sign language after losing her hearing. Without thinking, he raised his hands and began forming simple signs. "Hello, are you okay?" Lyra froze at first, unsure what he meant. Then slowly she raised her hand and returned a tentative sign. "Hello." Ethan felt a warmth he had not expected. Here was a child, so isolated in her own world, finally connecting with someone who understood, even without words. He signed back, "I am Ethan." "What is your name?" Lyra hesitated, then formed the signs for Lyra. Her hands moved awkwardly but clearly. The moment felt fragile, like a crystal balancing on a knife's edge. Ethan knew that if anyone saw them, it could be considered an intrusion, even disrespect. But he could not stop himself. He continued to sign, asking about her favorite things, the stars she liked to watch, and the stories she had heard from her mother. Lyra's responses were shy but growing in confidence, each sign more fluid than the last. From across the room he noticed the queen's gaze. Asira was watching, silent and still. Ethan felt a flicker of panic. Had he broken the rules? but there was no anger in her eyes. Only surprise and perhaps something softer, a faint glimmer of understanding he could not quite read. The next day, Ethan continued his careful observation of the court. Negotiations had begun in earnest, but the room felt cold and formal, every gesture calculated. He noticed the tension in Lyra's shoulders, how she remained close to the queen yet seemed separate from everyone else. During a brief break, he signed a simple message: "Do not worry. You are safe." Her eyes widened in recognition, and she responded with a small smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time in days. Ethan felt the weight of his own humanity in that moment, the power of connection without words. He realized that the human's greatest strength was not in weapons or technology, but in their capacity to care, to understand, to act with empathy when it mattered most. Lyra's small hand, raised in response to his signs, felt like a spark of hope in the tense, formal world of Aerolith's court. Over the following week, Ethan's silent interactions with Lyra became routine. He taught her simple phrases about the sun, about the stars, about Earth. She learned quickly, her movements becoming confident and expressive. The queen continued to watch from a distance, maintaining her composure, but Ethan could feel her eyes upon him whenever he was near Lyra. The court, unaware of these small exchanges, moved with rigid precision. Meetings about trade agreements and security were fraught with tension. Alien ministers argued in low tones, their sharp gestures cutting the air. Ethan sat quietly, absorbing everything, signaling occasionally to Lyra when he could without being noticed. One evening, a crisis struck. A neighboring faction of aliens accused humans of espionage, claiming their presence on Aerolith was a threat. The queen's advisors whispered urgently, and the tension in the palace reached a breaking point. Ethan remained calm, observing, noting the unspoken dynamics between the queen, her daughter, and the ministers. He understood that diplomacy required more than words. It required reading the silences, the gestures, the hidden meanings. Lyra, sensing the tension, clutched her mother's arm. She could not speak, but she looked at Ethan with wide eyes. He signed quickly, "Stay calm." "All will be well." She hesitated, then signed back, "Will it?" His hands moved with care, reassuring her as much as he could. The queen finally stepped into the room, composed, commanding attention. She addressed the accusations with measured precision, her voice calm but strong. Ethan watched, knowing that the smallest error could escalate the situation. Through it all, Lyra remained by her mother's side, her hands fidgeting, her eyes occasionally darting to Ethan. Later, when the meeting ended and the court began to disperse, Ethan approached Lyra again. She signed quickly, almost desperately. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan smiled gently, forming the signs. "Because someone should. You deserve to be understood." Lyra's eyes filled with a quiet joy, a rare expression in a world that often overlooked her. The queen observed this exchange from a distance. Her composed facade faltered slightly, a single tear threatening to escape her carefully maintained control. She realized in that moment that this human, quiet, respectful, and brave, had done what no one in her court had ever done. He had truly seen her daughter. Ethan's silence, his patience, his willingness to connect without breaking protocol spoke volumes. The queen's mind raced. Could humans be trusted? Could they bring more than mere negotiation to her world? Could they teach her people something deeper, something beyond protocol and tradition? As night fell over the palace, the stars of Aerolith shimmering faintly through the vast windows, Ethan sat quietly, hands folded, thinking about the fragile connections he had begun to forge. Lyra's small hand had touched his in a simple gesture of trust, and the weight of what that meant pressed on him gently. He had followed the orders to remain quiet, but in that silence, he had found a voice far more powerful than words. The queen stood silently behind the curtains, watching her daughter's first moments of true understanding, feeling an emotion she had not allowed herself in years. It was fear, yes, of losing control, but also awe, admiration, and something softer, hope. Ethan had arrived as a diplomat, a human ambassador tasked with peace. But already, he had done more than that. He had begun to show that humanity was capable of understanding, of empathy, of bridging gaps that even the most advanced alien society had struggled to cross. And for the Queen, witnessing this quiet courage and gentle understanding, it was more moving than any words could express. And so, the first threads of trust, of connection, were quietly woven in the halls of the palace. Ethan remained silent, as he had been told, but in that silence he had spoken to the heart of a child and caught the attention of a queen. The seeds of change had been planted, fragile yet unstoppable, in a world that had never known such understanding before. The morning sun rose over the gleaming towers of the palace, casting long streaks of violet light across the courtyard. Ethan walked quietly along the polished floors, careful not to disturb the attendants who moved with precise, measured steps. The human diplomats were already gathered in the audience chamber, their faces tense with the weight of the ongoing negotiations. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of Lyra, the young girl who had opened a window into a world of trust and understanding that no human word could fully express. Lyra had greeted him that morning with a shy wave, her hands moving carefully to form the signs they had been practicing. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and Ethan smiled beneath the calm exterior he presented to the palace. Every moment he spent with her reminded him that the strength of humans was not only in speech, in authority, or in battle. It was in the ability to reach out, to connect, and to understand someone who had been overlooked by everyone else. The Queen observed them from her high balcony, hidden by the flowing curtains that framed her presence like a shadowed halo. She had not approached Ethan yet, though she found herself drawn to his quiet courage. He obeyed the rules, yet he had found a way to break through the barriers surrounding her daughter. The Queen's eyes softened, and a warmth she had long buried stirred deep within her chest. Ethan found a quiet corner in the vast hallway where Lyra often lingered, near the sculpted wall of crystal symbols. The girl was already there, tracing her fingers over the carvings, and she looked up at him with a faint, hopeful smile. He knelt slightly to meet her at eye level, careful not to draw attention. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, forming the signs. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" Lyra's response was immediate. She signed back, "Yes, did you?" Ethan nodded, signing, "I did. I am ready to spend time with you today." She beamed, a small but genuine expression of happiness that seemed almost forbidden in the palace, where children, especially those who could not hear, were often treated as delicate objects rather than individuals with minds and feelings of their own. The day began quietly, Ethan and Lyra sharing small moments between the formalities of the court. He showed her how the symbols on the walls could be traced into patterns that told stories, teaching her a rudimentary way to communicate more complex ideas through movement. She responded with delight, her small hands moving more confidently with each sign. The connection between them grew, subtle yet unbreakable, in a way that transcended spoken language. Meanwhile, tension in the palace was rising. The accusations from the neighboring alien faction had not subsided. Queen Asira's ministers were restless, whispering urgently about security breaches and potential threats. Ethan observed the interactions with a careful eye, understanding that diplomacy was not only about words, but about timing, patience, and perception. He remained quiet, as he had been instructed, yet his mind was alive with strategies and possibilities. During a midday gathering in the audience chamber, the Queen addressed her ministers with calm authority. Her voice, smooth and measured, carried across the room like a river of light, but Ethan noticed Lyra fidgeting beside her. She was anxious, her small hands moving nervously. No one else seemed to notice. Ethan felt a quiet responsibility. He signed quickly to her, "Stay calm. You are safe here." Lyra's eyes widened in recognition, and she returned the gesture, a small comfort in a room filled with tension. Later, in a secluded courtyard lined with crystalline trees that shimmered in colors humans could not name, Ethan sat with Lyra. They were alone, for once, and the hum of the palace felt distant. He began to teach her more advanced signs, ones that could express feelings rather than just simple ideas. "Do you like the stars?" he signed. Lyra's eyes lit up. She signed back, "I want to touch them." Ethan smiled, forming a sign to communicate understanding. "I will help you see them closer." She laughed softly, a soundless expression that conveyed joy and trust, and Ethan felt a profound sense of purpose. He was not here just as a diplomat. He was here as a bridge, a living example of what humanity could offer: care, patience, and the courage to connect where others saw only silence. That evening, the Queen summoned Ethan to her private chambers. The summons was formal, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. He followed the attendants through winding halls, the air thick with anticipation. When he entered, the Queen stood near a tall window, the stars of Aralith shining behind her like scattered jewels. Lyra was there, watching quietly, her small hands clasped together. "Ethan," the Queen began, her voice calm but tinged with something unfamiliar, "I have observed your actions with Lyra." She paused, her gaze fixed on her daughter, who was now clearly intrigued by the silent conversation unfolding before her. "You have broken no rules, yet you have done something none of my court has achieved. You have reached her, and in doing so, you have reached me." Ethan bowed slightly, hands folded in respect. "I only wish to communicate. She deserves to be understood." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she signed to Lyra, something the girl did not fully understand at first. Ethan interpreted the signs carefully, forming the words in a way Lyra could follow. The Queen's gestures were careful but deliberate, and Ethan realized she was trying to communicate her gratitude, even if imperfectly. Lyra's eyes widened as she realized the meaning, and she returned a shy, hesitant sign. "Thank you." The Queen's face softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine emotion break through her regal composure. A single tear escaped, trailing down the side of her cheek. Ethan did not flinch, understanding that this was a rare and profound moment. It was a recognition not only of his actions, but of the human capacity to connect in ways beyond diplomacy, beyond negotiation, beyond power. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to spend time with Lyra whenever he could, always careful to respect the boundaries of the court. He taught her about Earth, about human culture, about the stars and the sea. Lyra responded with curiosity and excitement, her hands moving fluidly, her confidence growing. She began to sign stories back to him, simple at first, then more complex, expressing dreams of exploration and understanding. The Queen watched from afar, often unnoticed. Her emotions were conflicted: pride, surprise, a touch of sorrow for the isolation her daughter had endured. She realized that humans, despite their silence, were capable of teaching lessons her own people had not learned: patience, empathy, and the courage to reach out to those who seemed unreachable. One afternoon, a security alert rang through the palace. A scout had reported unusual movement near the borders, and the court erupted into controlled chaos. Ministers whispered urgently, attendants rushed to their posts, and the Queen's composure remained steady but tense. Ethan remained calm, analyzing the situation. He noticed Lyra's eyes widening with fear. Without hesitation, he signed quickly to her, "Stay with me. You are safe." Lyra clutched his hand, her small fingers tightening around his. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility, not as a diplomat but as a protector. He guided her to a quiet room, away from the commotion, and they waited together, communicating through signs, sharing thoughts, fears, and quiet reassurances. The Queen observed from a balcony above, unseen by anyone. Tears welled in her eyes again. She had ruled her people with authority and precision, but she had never understood the depth of connection possible between beings, especially across species. Ethan's actions, quiet and deliberate, revealed something profound about humanity. That courage was not only in battle or strategy, but in empathy, understanding, and the courage to reach out when it mattered most. By evening, the alert had passed. The scouts returned with news of nothing more than a false alarm, but the palace atmosphere had shifted. Ethan's calm presence, his gentle communication with Lyra, had left an impression on the queen that no formal ceremony or speech could achieve. That night, Ethan returned to the courtyard where Lyra often lingered. The stars shone brightly, their light reflecting off the crystalline trees. Lyra signed to him eagerly, sharing stories of what she had learned that day, her hands moving with confidence and excitement. Ethan responded, signing carefully, encouragingly, celebrating each new sign, each new story. The queen watched from her chambers, her heart full of emotions she could barely name. She realized that this human had done what no one else could. He had not only reached her daughter but had also touched her own heart. She wept quietly, moved by a mixture of awe and gratitude. In Ethan, she saw a reminder that humanity's strength was not just in technology or negotiation, but in the courage to care, to connect, and to bridge the gaps that even the most advanced civilizations struggled to cross. By the end of Part 2, the palace was no longer just a place of rigid rules and formalities. It had become a space where understanding and connection had begun to flourish, led quietly by a human who had been told to remain silent. And in the eyes of the queen, that silence spoke louder than any words could. The morning light on Aerolith cast a soft glow over the palace, illuminating the intricate carvings on the walls and the crystalline floors that reflected the shimmering colors of the sky. Ethan moved quietly through the halls, carrying himself with the same calm patience that had become his quiet signature in the palace. Today felt different. He could sense it in the subtle glances from the attendants and in the careful way the queen's ministers whispered to one another. Something was changing, though he did not yet know how. Lyra was waiting for him in her usual corner, tracing the carvings on the wall with delicate fingers. She looked up as he approached, her eyes shining with excitement. She signed quickly, "Today feels important." Why? Ethan knelt to meet her gaze, forming the sign slowly, deliberately. Because today the queen will see, today she will understand fully. Lyra's eyes widened. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she trusted him. She always had. The queen had summoned them both to the central audience chamber. The human diplomats had been quietly informed that they were to remain in their quarters. The chamber was vast, its ceilings high, adorned with swirling colors of light that shifted as if responding to the emotions of those within it. The queen stood at the far end, tall and radiant, with Lyra by her side. Ethan's heart beat steadily, but he remained composed. He had no words to speak, only his hands and the language of connection. As they entered, the queen's voice filled the chamber. "Today, you will show me something none of us have seen before," she said, her tone calm but carrying the weight of authority. Lyra glanced at her mother, unsure of what was expected. Ethan bent slightly, moving close to Lyra, and signed, "We will do this together. You are ready." Lyra nodded, determination shining in her eyes. Ethan began to sign to Lyra, forming sentences with care, teaching her to express not just thoughts but emotions. Lyra's hands moved in response, initially hesitant, then confident, forming signs that conveyed excitement, joy, and curiosity. The queen watched intently, her eyes widening as she began to understand the depth of their communication. The court was silent, ministers and attendants frozen in disbelief. They had never witnessed such a display of understanding, a conversation that transcended language and species. As Lyra's confidence grew, she signed a message that Ethan carefully interpreted for the queen. "He understands me. He listens. He is kind." The The words hung in the chamber like a revelation. The queen's eyes filled with tears. She had always known that humans were capable of bravery and intelligence, but this was something far greater. It was empathy, patience, and courage combined, a willingness to see someone else, truly see them without expectation or fear. Ethan continued to sign, encouraging Lyra to express herself fully. She told stories of her dreams, of the stars she wanted to touch, of the world she wished to explore. Each sign carried meaning, each gesture a testament to her growing confidence. The queen watched, silent tears streaming down her face, as she realized that her daughter had found a voice, a connection that no one in the court had been able to provide. The ministers whispered among themselves, confusion and awe mixed in their voices. They had come to witness diplomacy, strategy, and negotiation, but instead, they were witnessing something far more powerful. Ethan's quiet courage, his willingness to connect without speaking, had shown them a human strength that no weapon or law could match. Finally, the queen stepped forward, her hands moving carefully as she signed to Lyra, expressing her gratitude in the only way the girl could fully understand. Ethan interpreted, "Your mother is proud of you. She sees what you can do." "She sees you." Lyra's eyes filled with tears of happiness. She signed back to Ethan, "Thank you for helping me." Ethan smiled, his heart full, and signed once more, "You did all the work. I only guided you." The queen turned her attention to Ethan. Her voice trembled slightly, though her authority remained unshaken. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said. "You have shown me what humanity is capable of, not just strength or wisdom, but true understanding. In you, I see the courage to care, to connect, and to bring light where there was only silence." Ethan bowed respectfully, feeling the weight of her words. He had come to this world to serve as a diplomat, but he had become something more, a bridge between worlds, a living example of what it meant to be human. Lyra, now glowing with confidence, took a step forward and signed directly to her mother. "I am not alone. I am seen. I am heard." The queen's tears flowed freely now. She had spent years ruling with precision and control, but she had never truly understood the power of connection until this moment. Her daughter, once isolated, now had a voice, and it was a human who had unlocked it. The court erupted in quiet murmurs of awe. Attendants and ministers approached cautiously, curiosity and respect in their eyes. They had witnessed a human achieve something that no alien protocol or tradition could teach: the courage to care, to listen, and to act with empathy. The queen raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent once more. She addressed her ministers. "Let this day remind us that strength is not only in commands or power, but in understanding. Let us learn from what we have witnessed here." Ethan remained at Lyra's side, his presence quiet but commanding in its simplicity. He had been told to stay silent, yet his silence had spoken volumes. The queen approached him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and gratitude that transcended words. "You have changed more than my daughter's life," she said softly. "You have changed mine, and perhaps the way our people will see humanity forever." Ethan nodded humbly, aware that he had done only what was natural, what any human would do when faced with someone in need. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. The ministers, once rigid and formal, began to approach matters with a new perspective. They listened more carefully, observed more thoughtfully, and treated Lyra with a respect that had been absent before. The queen's example, inspired by Ethan, created a ripple of change that extended beyond her daughter and beyond the human delegation. Ethan continued his silent lessons with Lyra, exploring ideas, stories, and dreams. She grew more confident with each passing day, sharing her thoughts with the court, expressing herself in ways that were celebrated rather than hidden. The queen watched with pride, a soft smile on her lips, knowing that the connection between human and alien had forged something extraordinary. One evening, as the twin moons of Aerolith rose over the horizon, Lyra signed to Ethan, "I want to go outside and see the stars." Ethan nodded, smiling. Together, they stepped onto the palace balcony, the cool air brushing against their skin. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the sky like diamonds, and Ethan signed carefully, describing constellations and worlds far beyond their own. Lyra listened with wide eyes, signing back her wonder and amazement. The queen joined them silently, standing behind her daughter, her hand resting lightly on Lyra's shoulder. She watched as Ethan guided her daughter's hands, teaching her not just signs but connection, patience, and courage. The tears she had shed earlier returned, but now they were tears of joy. She had seen the true nature of humanity, a species capable of understanding, compassion, and bravery in the smallest, most meaningful acts. In the quiet of the night, the palace felt alive in a new way. The corridors, once filled with formal whispers and careful movements, now carried a sense of openness and possibility. The Queen's people, inspired by what they had witnessed, began to embrace a culture of empathy, learning to value understanding alongside tradition. And at the center of it all was a human who had been told to remain silent, but had spoken louder than any words could, through patience, courage, and connection. Lyra leaned against Ethan, signing one last message before they returned inside. "Thank you for helping me find my voice." Ethan smiled, signing back, "You always had it. I just helped you see it." The queen watched them, her heart full, knowing that this day would be remembered as the moment humanity had shown its true strength, not in weapons or words, but in the courage to care, to understand, and to connect. As the night deepened, Ethan looked out over the palace, the stars reflecting in his eyes. He had come to Aerolith to negotiate peace, but he had found something far greater, the chance to show what humanity was capable of, the power of empathy, and the unspoken courage that could change hearts and minds across worlds. The queen, her daughter, and the court had all seen it now, and in their recognition, Ethan realized that humans' greatest strength had always been this, the ability to touch lives, even in silence. By the end of the day, the palace had transformed. Lyra was no longer isolated. The queen had discovered a new depth of hope, and the court had learned to value connection over protocol. Ethan, quiet and patient, had done what no words could achieve. And as he stood under the twin moons, watching the stars with Lyra and the queen, he understood that this moment, and the humanity it represented, would endure far longer than any treaty or declaration. The story closed on a quiet but powerful note. A human had shown the universe that true strength lay not in domination, not in authority, but in understanding, empathy, and courage. And in that understanding, bridges had been built, hearts had been opened, and the future had been forever changed.